Netflix released its first ever viewership data report, doubling down on its viewership transparency.
It's the first of what the company now says will be regular reports and a concession to actors and screenwriters' compensation.
This is the biggest disclosure from Hollywood or any streaming service anyway. Infinite amounts of data on 18,000 titles.
I mean, we've been waiting for this moment for 10 years, wondering what exactly people are watching on Netflix.
What did we actually learn from it?
Well, the viewership data doesn't tell us much. All it says is here's the total number of hours globally a particular piece of content was watched. Also, very important to point out, Netflix in their blog post where they announced the data says this data by itself will not determine success of a show.
Ultimately, this has been forced in some way by the strikes. Why was this transparency wanted?
Well, the creative community has been demanding more transparency for years. I mean, there was really no way to know if your show was a hit, was it a failure. You kind of had to take the streamer's word for it. You know, you can bet that every writer, actor, producer, even the competitors are going to be pouring through this data wanting to know, okay, this is what people are actually watching.
I don't know if they will. I've worked with data long enough that I know that if you just give somebody a spreadsheet, that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to know what to do with it or to be able to understand what are the important things that the data is telling them.
Audio testing, audio testing, audio testing. If you put raw data like that into a visualization tool, it's a lot easier to interact with the data and understand what it's telling you. That's what I've done here in Tableau. I started out with a couple summary views so that we can wrap our head around titles, watch hours at a high level. So, how many hours did we watch? This is just adding together all of the hours across all titles during this 6-month period. And globally, we spent 93 billion hours watching 18,000 titles. You hear 93 billion hours, that's a lot, but what does that really mean? I wanted to put it into some context. So here I've done some back of the napkin calculations. 93 billion hours divided by 180 days, that's 6 months, equals 519 million hours per day. If you divide that by 24 hours per day, that's 21 million devices watching Netflix 24/7. 21 million, again, what's that? The population of Florida is 22 million. So you can picture every single person in Florida watching Netflix 24/7. That's how many people are watching Netflix around the world at a given time. Does the 80-20 rule apply to Netflix titles? Big time. So the top 20% of titles account for 86% of all the hours viewed. That's 3,000 titles accounting for 80 billion watch hours. The cool thing about Tableau is you can add tooltips. So if you hover over, you can see these data points used in a sentence. All right, so which titles were watched the most? This is the engagement report that Netflix released. And you can see it's just listing out all the titles ranked 1 through 18,000 whatever by their watch hours. So the top title was The Night Agent Season 1. And actually, most of the top titles are TV shows, which makes sense because if we're ranking them by hours, there's a lot more hours of a TV show than there is a movie. The first movie to even show up on the list is number 14, which was The Mother. Did the most watched titles have recent release dates? Yes. The majority of the top 50 titles were newer releases, and there were only a few exceptions. This makes sense as a viewer because we're always itching to watch the new content. Each of these circles are one of the titles in the top 50. So majority of them are over here, released in 2023 or in the few months leading up to it. There's only a few exceptions back here. And so, for example, we see Ginny and Georgia Season 1 was released back in 2021, but somehow it made it up to number 19. And the reason for that is probably because Ginny and Georgia Season 2 was released during the time frame of the report. This probably got viewers going back to watch or rewatch Season 1. A similar thing happened with the Outer Banks and Manifest series. This view really highlights the problem with just looking at this one report that Netflix released because it's 6 months of data. So all the titles that are going to be most watched are going to be the ones that just got released. And it's hard to compare those to the performance of titles that were released in the past. Once I realized this, I decided to blend the report from Netflix with some other Netflix data. So they also release a top 10 report every week. This shows the top 10 titles in the 4 categories that they have. So it's only 40 titles per week, which is not that much information compared to the 18,000 titles in their other report. But this top 10 data gives us a better picture of how viewer data is changing over time. I wanted to use this data to specifically understand this phenomenon of when a new season gets released, how much do people go back and watch the old season? After Ginny and Georgia season 2 was released, it spent 7 consecutive weeks on the top 10 listing. And you can see in the light blue here, it's watch hours over time of those 7 weeks. In the dark blue, it's the watch hours for Ginny and Georgia season 1. So season 1 also made the top 10, and that's why we can see this data. During these 6 weeks when they were both in the top 10, the whole series amassed 770 million watch hours. 29% of them came from season 1, while 71% came from season 2. So the majority of the hours are going toward the new season, but it's still a pretty good chunk that are going back and watching the old season, which is pretty interesting. In this view, we're really starting to dig into the top 10 data set more. So Netflix started to release this data back in July of 2021. So you can see that's where our access starts. And this data is refreshed up until March 3rd, I think. So which titles were watched the most in 1 week? And you can see Squid Game is taking the cake on the most watch hours in 1 week. During the week of October 3rd, 2021, Squid Game was viewed for 572 million hours. So to put that into a little bit of perspective, going back to our engagement report, we can look at Queen Charlotte, A Bridgerton Story, got 503 million watch hours in 6 months, and Squid Game had 527 million in 1 week. That must be the highest performing title that Netflix has seen. The title with the next highest hours in 1 week is Wednesday. At its peak, it got 411 million watch hours in 1 week. Followed by Stranger Things season 4, which was viewed for 335 million hours. I'm curious how the other seasons of Stranger Things performed compared to Squid Game, but those were released before 2021 and before Netflix was releasing their top 10 data sets. So we don't have visibility into that. Which titles have spent the most time in the top 10? This is listing titles by category based on how many weeks they've spent in the top 10. So you can see here, Yo Soy Betty has spent 30 weeks in the top 10 for TV non-English, which is really crazy to think about, 30 weeks. There's 52 weeks in a year, so that's a very large portion of time that this title has been in the top 10. The next highest is Manifest Season 1, which is a TV English title. Films in English seem to spend less time overall in the top 10. Who knows why that is? Maybe they're pumping out films in English a lot faster, so there's continually turnover within the top 10. Or maybe just we're moving through the content more, who knows? How did the top titles compare across categories? So these are the titles in each category that have remained in the top 10 the longest. Squid Game Season 1 is clearly gonna blow everything out of the water with its high watch hours. So you can see that huge spike when it was first released. Yo Soy Betty, in these first few weeks, it had about 7.3 million watch hours. And towards its end, when it was on week number 30 of being in the top 10, it actually had 12.2 million watch hours. So somehow the watch hours went up over time. Pretty interesting. How did my favorite shows and movies perform? This is a filterable graph, so you can type in whichever title you'd like to look at. Here I've pre-populated it for the Love is Blind seasons, so we can see how they compare. Season 1 was released before this data set starts, so here you can see I have this potential data gaps warning. It appears as though Love is Blind Season 1 was in the top 10 for 1 week, but likely it would have been in the top 10 if that data was released at the time. So Season 2 is this blue line, and it performed very, very well. And you can see Season 6 has been trending higher than any of the other seasons. Personally, I like Season 1 the best, but I've been pretty into Season 6 as well. This last view is showcasing the top 10 if you really wanted to look at a particular week. So you can select a week with a drop down, and it'll show you the top 10 in each category. Netflix has this on their website, but I also wanted to include it on this dashboard. Something interesting that I found here, so I've listed out the views and the watch hours. Views, Netflix has defined as total watch hours divided by the total runtime. When you look at views, the playing field between movies and shows is evened out. Even if a show has a bazillion watch hours, it's divided by 8 hours of content. So it's a more comparable metric when you're looking at shows versus movies. And this is how Netflix has decided to rank their top 10, but they only started this in June of 2023. Prior to that date, you can see views isn't included in this data set, and it was just ranked by hours. I kind of like the views idea better, and it'll be nice when we have more data based on views, we can do more analysis with it. This dashboard is linked down below if you'd like to check it out. There's definitely stuff that I missed, so I'm interested to see what other people find. If you're interested in my workflow of how I put this together, I started out in Excel, analyzed the data there to figure out what my story was gonna be. Then I brought the data into Tableau and started building out some graphs, exploring the data further, figuring out my story further. Even with all these fancy tools, Tableau still isn't the best place for making designs. So to actually design the dashboard, I went into Figma. This is a free online software that a lot of companies use for UX design, user experience design. So I designed everything in there, and typically from there, you just have to export from Figma as a background PNG and upload it into Tableau. It's really manual, and if you want to make any tweaks, you just have to keep going back and forth, and it was really frustrating. But while I was working on this project, Tristan from Ladataviz actually released a Figma to Tableau plugin. So that was super helpful. I got to use it for the first time on this. He has a great YouTube video showing you how to do it step by step, but just as an overview, you basically create all of your layers in Figma, but the way that you name your layers will help this plugin understand how to import it into Tableau. So basically you just design in Figma and export a Tableau document from Figma and then upload it into Tableau. It's so cool. If you are into this sort of thing, definitely go check it out. All right, toodles. No, that's bad. Okay. If you put raw data like that into a data visuals, you wrap our head around total watch hours. I think this demonstrates the, I don't know. Queen Charlotte, a Bridgerton story, got 503 million. Oh my gosh, wait, what the hell? Okay, those were released before July 2021, I think. And I have links to the data sources there as well.